It is day 7, which is how you will lead. This is the sixth and final principle for how you can empower your leadership with queer integrity. Now, day 7, we're not quite done because I want to have an additional day where we pull all the threads, all the individual principles together so that you get that refinement of that pathway, all of the elements that support a human-hearted leadership with queer integrity. How you show up in the world, this is where it all comes together. Your values, your vision, your vitality, your voice, everything converges in the service of others, in the service of all of these principles. Now, if you've watched all of these videos, I believe you are probably the kind of person who will get the expression in the service of others, not to be completely selfless, not to be on the opposite side, completely egotistical, ego-driven, and only self-serving, but recognizing that fairness, freedom, equity, equality, dignity requires connection, engagement, communication, understanding, acceptance, and on and on. But it is working with others, supporting others, sharing your wisdom, guiding, listening, seeing the value in others, empowering others, that is the service to others, that when you do that, really reflects back on you, and there will always be someone else who you follow, who inspires you to look up to the way in which they lead and the difference that they're looking to accomplish in the world, right? So to lead, L-E-A-D, again, one more acronym, is to live in alignment with your ethics and to embody a kind of leadership that cultivates dignity, equity, and humanity. That's the short version of everything I just said. So the definitions of the 4 letters for the acronym LEAD are, or the words first, and then I'll get into the definitions: liberation, equity, accountability, and direction. So let's look at each one and then get into a deeper understanding of how all this works together, at least for the purpose of this 7-day program and leading with queer integrity. So liberation, this is how you lead in ways that liberate yourself, make yourself freer, more authentic, and others from systems of oppression, from fear, and from conformity. It doesn't mean always having to work against and abolish and break down the system, but it certainly means looking at what aspects are limiting your ability to be the best of who you are, and the same for others. And this is the heart of transformational leadership, expanding freedom through ethical courage. The letter E for equity. This is making fairness and justice and inclusion central to your leadership. You lead not to dominate, but to uplift, to ensure that every voice matters and every person belongs. Accountability, that is taking responsibility for your actions and your impact. Because impact is a neutral word, right? You can have a negative impact, you can have a positive impact. You can have a, well, you can't really have a neutral impact because that wouldn't be an impact at all. So ethical leadership means acting with integrity, being whole, standing by your values, and being answerable to both your conscience and your community, the people that you wish to serve and support and lead. And finally, direction. That is providing a clear values-based direction and guidance that inspires others to follow your lead. Through your example, you offer a path, a map, a pathway forward that's principled, purposeful, and human-hearted. Okay? So to lead within the framework of the principles that I teach in my coaching philosophy is to take everything you've learned and lived through and experienced and understood about yourself in these previous 5 pillars your well-being, your values, your thinking, your voice, and your dream, and channel it into visible, influential action. And this is your call to guide, to serve, and to transform. So I want to make what seems like a little bit of a diversion, something perhaps a little different for this principle than the other principle. But it's really important because leadership really requires a lot of vulnerability in the sense of you are seen. Other people are watching what you do. And vulnerability, I'm not going to get into it too much here, is a bigger question about how much are you willing to reveal of yourself in the sense of being willing to admit to your own mistakes, that you are still learning just as much as anybody else is learning, and to lead by example, because that creates a lot of trust. But with this vulnerability and with any kind of leadership, there's always going to be criticism, right? So the question is, how much do you struggle with criticism around your leadership? So a while ago, I was reading a little Substack note, a very short few lines by Adam Grant, who writes a lot about thinking. And I'll read his quotation here. People who can't handle criticism are unfit to lead. Weak leaders fear dissent as a threat to their power. They silence their critics to shield their egos. Strong leaders welcome dissent as an opportunity for growth. They silence their egos to learn from their critics. End quote. It's worth sharing that because I do not believe that Grant's opinion is nuanced enough, because it risks overlooking the reality of human experience and all of our reactions. But this was a little short note to get some attention and perhaps go to his Substack and read more, right? No one is above the sting of criticism. No matter how good we are at maintaining our optimal state of emotions, there's always going to be that criticism that gets your back up, right? So let's consider what's happening when other people challenge who we are or challenge our leadership directly. When you lead in a way to make a meaningful difference in the world, that means you're living in full alignment with your ethics, what you believe to be true, and you embody a kind of leadership that cultivates dignity and equity and humanity. So this style of leadership that I'm describing is the difference between being in your own power, being fully integrated, leading with integrity, and being an inspiration for others to follow your lead, instead of powering over others with control and force and dictating what people should and should not do at the expense of penalty. So if you are a leader in any capacity who cares about making a positive difference in the world, you're going to come up against resistance and dissent. Because if you care about making a difference in the world, you're going to challenge deep-seated opinions, beliefs, and values, which you may believe are wrong. But the quality of your leadership is going to be how you find the gaps in between that create connection and understanding between yourself and the other people that you are leading. So consider this. You're criticized for something that you said, you wrote, or you did. Do you feel attacked or defensive, uncertain or unsure, maybe unrecognized or unvalued because you thought you were doing something really important and meaningful? Maybe you feel stupid or ashamed. I think all of these reactions are valuable. As we experience these things and these feelings and these perceptions, it means you're human. It means you have a capacity to feel that is a response to calling into question, am I doing this right? Am I doing this to the best of my ability? Do I believe what I'm doing to be true? Right? And if you're able to question those moments, that's really important for your self-leadership, because that's the integrity for you to take a pause and step back and reflect and wonder if you actually made a highness mistake, a, a bit of a glitch, an error, or whether you're just coming up against someone else who just doesn't agree with you. Okay, so your reaction in these kinds of situations of harsh criticism mean that you care about what you're doing and the people you are supporting enough to doubt not yourself. That's what I wrote, and I'm correcting myself. So not to doubt yourself, not to doubt who you are, but to doubt for a moment your values and your beliefs enough to take a look at them critically and make sure that they are aligned and whether or not you need to make any refinements. So whatever your emotional response, criticism invites you to look inward, to assess your beliefs, your thought processes, and your actions and decide if you need to make refinements. Now, for me, forceful or negative criticism of my ideas is very often an emotional trigger, and I have identified where that comes from. My childhood and early adolescence upbringing, learning patterns from one of my parents. I may feel immediately on the defensive, and I'm better at catching myself than I ever used to be, and I get better and better at slowing down, doing what I need to do to let my reaction pass so that I can be thoughtful and respond instead of react. I will consider, was I clear enough? Did I not take enough time to be thoughtful and meaningful with what it is I wanted to say so that people would understand my communication? Or was I even wrong? And if I was wrong, I own my mistake and I correct it. But if I also believe that I'm right, that my values and my beliefs are aligned with what I stand for, I will do my best to further explain my positioning and reasoning. So you can see there's a lot of personal responsibility and ownership in being a leader, right? And that is about your integrity, leading with queer integrity. This is really what it is about. And it is the call to lead, which is this challenge to know thyself so well that you can stand firmly rooted in your values and beliefs and what you hold to be ethical and moral. So as a statement, human-hearted leaders and ethical change makers create positive freedom for those they guide and support to experience more of what makes their lives meaningful and joyful. And pay attention to the word their lives. It refers both to you and to those who you lead. You cannot cultivate meaning or joy in other people without creating it or experiencing it first for yourself. And experiencing joy and knowing how to lead from that place and happiness. And remember, I spoke about this in an earlier principle, is vital, because when you can see the happiness and joy in other people that you've inspired, that feeds your joy and happiness and personal satisfaction. And that cultivates further your capacity as a leader. So there's a lot of explanation in this video. This is the invitation for you to step forward as an action-oriented movement that is aligned with your integrity. So here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm inviting you to answer a series of questions to help you discover where you stand within your leadership efficacy, how effective, how efficient it is for you to show up and lead so that you can be responsive to criticism as opposed to reactive. This exercise today, this invitation, may require you to consider a little bit when your leadership was called into question, when you were criticized. Take some time. Maybe it's a very recent thing, and if it's a recent thing, that's fantastic because those emotions are still going to have some resonance with you. And if there's nothing that immediately comes up to mind, then think back to perhaps a really challenging situation, because that's going to be the one that's going to show up first in your memory. So ask yourself, how did you feel? Was it one of the four examples that I expressed above? And go back and look at the notes that I've written here. And just to remind you, being attacked, feeling uncertain, unrecognized, stupid, or ashamed? Or was it something else? The next question is there an observable pattern? Has this happened repeatedly? For example, do you more often feel, for example, stupid, or do you more often feel defensive? That's a pattern. And how did you act in that moment? You know, did you, as a response to feeling, or as a reaction to feeling, let's say, stupid or defensive, as an example, what did you do? Did you push through or did you pull back? Did you push through and keep trying to make your point and perhaps getting uh, further down the rabbit hole of feeling like you really don't know what the heck you're talking about, or getting angrier and more belligerent, which is the outcome of feeling defensive, for example? Think through what your reaction was and the kinds of behavior and characteristics and emotions or feelings that come up as a result of that. And then ask yourself, how is that working for you? Because if that's a pattern that continues every time you are confronted with criticism, how is that working for you? Right? If we never identify our behaviors, we have no opportunity to replace them with more skillful behaviors, right? You can't really change a behavior, but you can practice and adopt the practice for a new behavior. You can find out what skills you need to address and practice them so they become habituated, so that they become more of a routine. This is how our brain works. It is something like a computer, much better than a computer, but when we give it the information and the skills and the practices and the tools that we want to cultivate to improve who we are, to make us happier, more personally responsible and aware of our emotional reactions, and being able to more easily move into emotional states that we want, we retrain our brain to do the things that make us feel better, because we are not chasing after, we are prioritizing these better ways of feeling, these better ways of showing up and being. I've actually just spoken about this next one, asking yourself, what's the meta lesson? Looking above from the 10,000 or 5,000 foot view, you're looking down at like, what all happened here? What is the opportunity to become more skillful in dealing with criticism? Perhaps the nuance here is, if you became more skillful in dealing with criticism, what would the benefits be? What would the results be? How would you lead differently? How would people perceive you? What would your level of trust be? What would your impact and influence be? And how do you want to feel or act differently the next time your leadership is criticized or questioned? So this goes back to creating the new habits. How do you want to feel? How do you want to act differently the next time your leadership is criticized or questioned? So you may have to find these skills. You may have to find these practices to put them into play. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes time. And if I have my hands here signaling different levels of intensity, if criticism comes in here, it probably has nothing. If criticism comes in a little bit higher, maybe you feel your back up going a little bit, but you feel that raise in pressure and you just go, it's okay. Or whatever it is, whatever skill you're practicing to bring yourself back. But when the criticism is up here, it's just too high. And perhaps the best you can do is that when you have pulled back or you're no longer facing that criticism directly and you've calmed down, you can assess that moment for what it was. It was on the high end of criticism, and you can do your best to prepare through practice to potentially manage that better, or to notice the signals and the triggers that are building so that you can keep pulling back, so you can keep pulling back, so you can keep pulling back. Because if you hit a criticism that is 100% full on without any warning, that's going to be very difficult. But if criticism is gradual in the space of, a conversation, for example, but you can keep pulling back, and it lowers it and it comes up again, keep pulling back, you're going to be able to self-master, manage your emotional state. And then what do you need to know, or what skill do you need to feel and act in the way you described in that last question, right? So in my speaking from what I know about this subject, I kind of blurred into these next questions that I've written out, but you can follow them one by one in the written notes here. But hopefully the way I've explained it for you makes it really clear, this process of how to make your own assessment and determination of how to analyze how you respond or react in situations to criticism and how that affects and impacts your leadership. So the final reflection, a question from the margins: what part of your queerness do you wish to acknowledge or celebrate as central to how you lead for yourself and others? So share your questions in the comments or whatever feels right to you. Send me a private message if this is just too personal or vulnerable and you want some feedback, but you don't want others to see what you've noted down. All right. Take some time to be curious and playful with this one. If you feel yourself getting upset when you think back to those moments of criticism, playful curiosity. Observe, witness, with as much impartiality as you can muster. Okay. I will see you tomorrow for day 8, when we pull all the threads together and combine what you've learned into a meaningful takeaway that you can use to empower your leadership with queer integrity. Okay, get to work, and I'll see you on the next video.